Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Kim Brown in Baltimore. Farmers, herders, and families in 7 countries across southern Africa and parts of East Africa are among the millions who are affected by a devastating drought that wiped out livestock, pushed up food prices, and caused food shortages as well as malnutrition in 2016. The drought, which is continuing, although it has worsened by the impacts of El Nino, has been linked to the effects of climate change. It is also affecting more than 60 million people and has resulted in acute malnutrition for 1.3 million children. With us to discuss this topic that has been highly underreported in Western media is Nnimmo Bassey. He is a Nigerian architect, environmental activist, author, and poet who chaired the Friends of the Earth International from 2008 to 2012 and was executive director of the Environmental Rights Action for 2 decades. He's also currently the director of Health and of Mother Earth Foundation. Nnimmo, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
So first, is the crisis subsiding, or are we still seeing the devastating effects of the drought that was partly driven by El Nino last year? And our country still in a state of water and food emergency?
Yeah, the impact is really still very strong, unfortunately, especially in the Horn of Africa, in the area of Somalia, and as well as in southern and parts of Eastern Africa. We're having serious droughts in that region. And because, of course, when you have prolonged droughts, you also have the impact on agricultural production. So that we're having food shortages apart from the usual water stress in this kind of period, having serious impacts on food that's available, as well as on the pastoralists in operating and living in that part of the world. Beyond the very intense droughts in the that part of Southern Africa and around the Horn, we also have threats of climate impacts in the Sahel region of Western Africa. So it's actually a major challenge facing the continent. And it's something that we thought would take a central place in the so-called African COP, African Climate Conference that was held in Marrakesh, Morocco in November last year. But, we don't really see sufficient action taken into cognizance the fact that this is actually an emergency situation.
So, Nnimmo, how does this drought of 2016, that is obviously extending into the beginning part of 2017, how is this different from droughts of the past in the Horn of Africa and East Africa?
What we're having now, I believe, is a more climate differentiation, climate change. And so it appears that what we're seeing now may actually not just be, it may not be something that happens, because we used to have droughts, periods of droughts, then things will stabilize and become normal. But this appears to be something that may be more long-lasting than usual.
So, Nnimmo, talk about the migration that is taking place in Africa due to climate change and who is being impacted and affected the most.
The challenge for us is that in official circles, international circles, governments are refusing to acknowledge the fact that we actually have climate refugees. In Africa, there are many people who are forced to become refugees because of the changes in the climate. And people are refusing, governments are refusing to acknowledge the fact that these are refugees because they don't want to apply what is required in the conventions on refugees, and they want to deny access to people who are looking for refuge from the impacts of global warming. And this has exposed many young people to try to get out of the continent, sometimes by any means possible. And thousands have lost their lives trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea, across the desert, Sahara Desert, for example. This is really a very dramatic representation of the fact that young people and women, especially the youths, are most impacted in terms of those who are looking for way out of the drought-stricken areas. So those are the the groups that are mostly impacted, we have the young people and the women. But of course, the adult men are also impacted because they're the farmers, they're the pastoralists, and farming is becoming increasingly challenged in parts of Eastern Africa and Southern Africa because of prolonged droughts that we've been having. Now, if you come down to West Africa, I'm sure there used to be one of the big inland lakes at the northeastern tip of Nigeria, Lake Chad, shared by Chad, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Niger Republic. And in the 1960s, Lake Chad was about 25,000 square kilometers big. And right now is shrunk down to less than 10% of the regional size. So this has meant the displacement of pastoralists, of farmers, of fisher folks, and they're moving in various directions. Sometimes this generates conflicts with farmers in other places. So you have all these groups of people being impacted by climate, being displaced by climate. And of course, in the coastal area, for example, in the coastal part of Nigeria, the Niger Delta, which is one of the most polluted parts of the world from oil extraction, we're having increasing loss of territory to sea level rise and coastal erosion. So it's really a very serious threat to the continent, and people have been displaced by drought, by floods, by coastal erosion, and by water source shrinkage.
So when we talk about aid to Africa, some make the case that what is being given in aid ignores that much more is actually being taken in terms of resource extraction, Nnimmo, like you just mentioned, in addition to land also being taken. So can you talk about this disparity, about how much global aid is coming to Africa, but it really pales in comparison to what is being removed from Africa?
You really summarized it. So that's a good starting point. The so-called aid that is coming to Africa is like a tip that you give to a waiter at a restaurant. Without even paying for the food that you're eating, you just pay a tip that doesn't go to the owner of the food. So Africa is still being, unfortunately, as exploited as the continent has always been in the various stages of her history. We're having an extremely irresponsible neo-colonial system operating on the continent with willing agents, local agents, who are, of course, working for the benefit of big capital. So the level of exploitation right now and financialization of nature is so high that whatever anybody says is aid given to Africa is just a way of making the politicians feel good and then just keeping the books. There are many things we talk about with regard to this, and sometimes we feel actually insulted by the argument being put forward that even at the level of saying that African governments are irresponsible, corrupt, but actually the exploiters, the transnational corporations who are taking minerals, taking oil, taking land on the continent, these are the people who are least transparent, and they are the ones who have sown the seed of corruption on the continent, and at the same time generating conflict and wars on the continent. And one thing we notice that no matter how much conflict you have in any particular region, the exploitation of natural resources continue apace. They never really slow down. And these days, we're having an increase of investment in quotes in infrastructure. And as usual, the infrastructures are all leading to the areas where resources are being extracted. For example, you build a pipeline to take oil from somewhere inland to the seaport for export to Europe or North America or Asia or wherever. You build a railway line, they're all going to the seaport. So we're having a kind of cargo culture being entrenched, where everything is taken for export and then other things are coming in as finished product or in exchange, whatever. So it's really a deep cycle of exploitation that needs very serious interrogation by generations of leaders.
The Green Climate Fund was set up by the United Nations to assist developing countries to transition to renewable energy and acknowledges that most developed economies, such as the United States, have contributed more to climate change and actually should pay for it. So can you talk about this issue, Nnimmo?
Yes, the Green Climate Fund, we all know, really became center stage in the failed Conference of Parties number 15 that took place in Copenhagen in 2009. That was when the Copenhagen Accord was brought in, driven by the US government. And the agreement was that 210 billion will be raised every year up to 2020, when 100 billion will be raised a year from then. Now, up to this moment, the targets being set, which were very arbitrary, they were not based on assessment of realities. The kind of climate impact that we have on the continent, the need for adaptation and for building resilience cannot be met by even those suggested figures for the Green Climate Fund. So again, the Green Climate Fund was presented as something that could appease, more or less, make people feel that something important is being done. And, you know, when you look at the level of destruction and you look at how much funds are being wasted in current warfare and military expenditure in the world, where up to $2 trillion are being spent by the rich countries every year in military hardware and warfare, destroying infrastructure, destroying cities around the world. When you think about that, and if you consider the fact that the world could not even raise anything close to 100 billion US dollars for climate mitigation and adaptation, then we can see that this is not anything meant to resolve the crisis. It's just a way of politicians making it seem like they're taking action, whereas they're actually doing nothing. And then the Green Climate Fund itself, by the modalities to access to the fund, you find that the vulnerable, the poor, they really deprived and impacted sectors of our continent, of small island states in the Pacific, they may not easily have access to those funds. But rather, the corporations who are engaged in exploitation and actually engaged in actions that are compounding climate impacts may find it easier to have access to the funds. So the entire thing, for me, to sum it up, is that if we build the Green Climate Fund on the so-called Paris Agreement, everything is just almost fiction, negligible, and would not be of any significant impact to address the issues on hand.
President-elect Donald Trump has said that he would pull out of the Paris Agreement, Nnimmo, and he also said that he would put the funds that President Obama has pledged to the Green Climate Fund, he would get rid of them. So what would you say to him on why he should not renege on these commitments?
Following on what we've been hearing coming from the President-elect of the United States concerning climate change and many other issues, if he made a statement that President Obama or that the U.S. would even pull out of the climate negotiations and he put the money that's been pledged somewhere else, I would not really be surprised. But what I would like to say to the new president of the United States is that it's actually in the best interest of the United States to not only put in that amount of money already pledged, but to multiply, to increase it. Because if you support adaptation and mitigation around the world, then you have less to worry about so many other things. But, you know, the truth be told, the United States has never really been very supportive of efforts to tackle global warming. This goes back all the way to when Kyoto Protocol was drawn up. The United States never endorsed Kyoto Protocol. And the Kyoto Protocol was the only binding mechanism, emission reduction mechanism, that required that rich countries do something that's verifiable, measurable to reduce emissions and so tackle global warming. For example, continue to pollute and claim that the equivalent of the carbon that you're emitting into the atmosphere is being absorbed by a forest or by soil somewhere else in the world. So you don't take any action at all. And the United States was really the principal nation that aborted the continuation of the Kyoto Protocol and brought in the Copenhagen Accord, and then it's finally brought in the Paris Agreement. All these are reductions and things that negate what is really needed to tackle global warming holistically by all those who are more responsible for the action, rather than putting the load of the action on poor, vulnerable countries that never contributed anything to global warming. For example, right now in the Paris Agreement, nations are putting forward what is known as nationally determined contributions to emission reduction. And these are just figures that countries dream up and decide this is what we can do, this is what we may do, this is what we may not do. And you find that in some of the countries that are really proposing they're going to curb emissions are countries that emit little or nothing. And so climate action is being offloaded on poor victims. And so those who are polluting, the rich countries who are polluting, just go home feeling that they're doing something, whereas really they are not.
And on a slightly different but related topic, the recent discovery just this week of possibly the world's largest tropical peatland was found in the Congo Basin. So can you talk about the significance of this and how it might further affect climate change? Because from what I understand, this is a carbon peatland, and the concern is that if somehow all of this carbon would be released into the atmosphere, it could be maybe catastrophic.
Definitely, but you see, the panic or the alarm being raised, to me, is a signal to again cut off the people who live in the territory, in the Congo Basin, from utilizing the resources available to them. Now, when you say that the peatland is storing up to 3 years of global carbon emissions, and so if the environment is disturbed, they're going to release methane and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. This is really a very big warning sign to me that land grabbing is about to be unleashed on that huge area that is said to be bigger than England. And so I think it's actually, while technically it's true that this amount of carbon is there, but we have to learn to look at forests and look at lands as lands, look at forests as forests, don't look at land or trees as carbon stock. The mentality of humanity to see nature as items in the laboratory or the market shelf is not helping humanity. It's not helping the planet. It's not helping anybody. So the people who live in the Congo Basin have managed their forests for centuries, for for a long time. They've not disturbed anything there. The communities maintain their forests. They maintain the land, the trees, and everything, the biodiversity. Human beings see themselves as part of nature and not owners of nature. So I just want people should just stay away and not find reasons to lock people out of their territories and lands.
Nnimmo Bassey, he is a Nigerian architect. He's also an environmental activist, author, and poet. We've been discussing the ongoing drought in Africa that is having not only a devastating effect on livestock and food accessibility, but over 1 million children have been suffering from malnutrition as a result of this extreme weather event that many attribute to climate change. Nnimmo, we appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
And thanks for watching the Real News Network.